right, hello fifth hour U.S. history students. So because of our registration process during our class today, we lost some class time. And so this is just a short supplemental video to kind of introduce you to this really distinctive president in 20th century American history named Calvin Coolidge. And I write down a main idea here. It says Calvin Coolidge offered a counterpoint to the modern presidency and was a key part of the economic success of the 1920s. So it's almost like if just about every president since TR zigged, Coolidge is the guy who zags. He kind of goes in a different direction. And I think it's a really interesting, it's an interesting idea to imagine him in our presidency today, or just even to take what lessons we could from him. And our learning target is very simple. I can describe the presidential approach of Calvin Coolidge. So it's pretty superficial. I just need us to understand a bit of who he was. So let's jump in. He's president during the 1920s, from 1923 till 1929. And he became president when Warren Harding died. You'll recall he was the vice president to Warren Harding. And Harding dies, again, randomly of a heart attack brought on by some illness from food poisoning. And Coolidge will be president during the kind of the most rip-roaring years of the Roaring Twenties. And he was a popular president, albeit in a weird way, just in a way that's almost hard to imagine him being that popular today. He was sort of popular because of, almost popular in spite of himself, right? Or popular for his quirks. His nickname is Silent Cal. That is very appropriate, very useful. Like he's just sort of, his idea is, I'm not going to talk about my work, and I'm not going to talk about what I'm going to do, and I'm not going to overpromise and oversell anything. I'm just going to shut up and do it. And I'm going to do it well, and I'm going to do it honestly. I'm not going to be, we recall someone like Warren Harding was not being fully honest and above board. He had demons, he had skeletons in his closet, and he had mistakes he was making. Or a president like TR would never stop talking, or to an extent Wilson would just never stop talking. And Coolidge was just sort of like just a whole different kind of cat. He had come up by being a governor in Massachusetts and just sort of was famous for like running a really tight ship, and problems did not emerge out of his governance, and he took care of things in a very crisp, precise manner. And that's sort of like how he was, just sort of like, I want to run a country the way that you run a household. Imagine like a president who had taken all the advice in Mr. Avery's personal finance class. That's kind of like Calvin Coolidge, and who didn't want to sort of spend a lick of time inspiring people or kind of rallying the public, was just like, let's just sort of do the right thing and do it cleanly and do it carefully. And so he was a part of Warren Harding's administration, but he has no problem cleaning up ship and firing some people after Harding dies and after these scandals come out. He's like, well, this is not a way of doing business. This is not a way of doing good government. And so he fires them. And by firing some Republicans, and Coolidge is a Republican himself, but by firing some big shot Republicans, Coolidge really rises in the esteem of many Americans. And Coolidge just, again, says, I don't have like some crazy recipe here. Like I just sort of am trying to do the thing. I'm living by thrift, right? Middle class values, just hard work and honesty and thrift. And this is what works in a household. And this is how we want our government to work as well. And in some ways, he doesn't do a lot as president, but he's like, I'm not doing a lot on purpose because I'm choosing to not do a lot, because I'm choosing to only do the things that matter and not do the things that just make noise. And so Coolidge, again, just has this, he sticks out because he doesn't have a big vision or big platform, a square deal or a new deal, or he's not a moral crusader like Woodrow Wilson. He's not a charismatic figure like all these other people. He's just he's about restraint. He's like the patron saint of self-control. Do we have self-control? Do we have politicians who have self-control? It's like that's Coolidge. And Coolidge just believed, the interesting thing about America is it's a beautiful nation with a good people, and a good people that does better when we get out of their way. When government sort of like is predictable and stands back and leaves a nice wide open playing field for the public and for the economy to do its thing, then good things happen. And so government, get out of people's way, get out of businesses' way, get out of the consumer's way. Just be predictable, stay on the sidelines, do what you need to do, of course, and do what must be done and do it well and frugally and be careful with the people's money, and otherwise stay out, stay back. And we don't need to create new moral crusades, and we don't need to create new controversies, and we don't need to create new political stinks every time. Like, we don't need to sort of be constantly puking and belching all over the American public. We can just sort of stay out of their hair and stay out of their affairs. He's just a believer. He says, we should bring down taxes. We don't need to be spending this much money, and he spends less. And he says we don't need to be taxing this much either, and we tax less. And he's like, and now when the American public has more money in their pocket, then they'll spend more, and that will be good for the economy. And so that basically proves to be true. When people had more money in their pockets in the 1920s, then they spent it. Now, it's debatable, as we learned in class, did they spend too much? Fine, that's not Calvin Coolidge's fault, all right? He's just saying it's the people's money, let them keep the people's money. And by lowering taxes, the funny thing is, he lowers taxes, the people are spending more money, the economy's moving and hopping, and all kinds of people are like rising up in their own income and wealth level are rising up, and their income brackets are rising. And actually, when the government taxes those people, even though it's lower taxes, people are moving up into higher rates of wealth. And so the government ended up making more money in tax revenue, if you can believe that, because it sort of like gave people money back, like the economy's taking off and bubbling and all the ships are rising, and the government made its money back by just taxing people who were making more and more money, right? And so it's kind of like a win-win. The government got its money back, and people could keep more of their own money, and they were rising up and becoming more prosperous. Now, there were times when the public did not like they did not like Calvin Coolidge. Famously, there's bad floods in Louisiana one year, 1927, I think it was. There's a good song about this. Anyway, and Coolidge, farmers have all kinds of basically sob stories. It's what today would probably just call a natural disaster, but Coolidge just says, it's not the federal government's job to bail you out of this, right? If state government wants to, they can. If local charity wants to, they can. If neighbors can help, the neighbors should help. But this is just not a job for the federal government, right? I'm going to stay off to the side and let the people do this. Let the nation take care of this. And he just says, because if it's like feeding the bears. As soon as we start feeding this, then we got to feed that and that and that and that and that. And then we aren't spending our money wisely anymore or frugally anymore. And so he just runs a tight ship, and he doesn't try to justify it. That's sort of what's interesting. He doesn't try to be well-liked, and because he doesn't try to be that well-liked, he ends up being kind of admired by the public. And the economic growth that came out of this period of time is just astounding. And so again, you just have this president who's like, my job is to just keep the government out of your hair, America. That's how he saw his job. And he went about that. And rarely did he ever really expound on his whole political philosophy. He's an introvert big time, so I can relate to that. He's kind of a prickly introvert. I hope I'm not too prickly, but that's sort of how he was. There's a famous story I'll tell where at a dinner party, it's probably apocryphal. It's almost too good to be true, but there's a dinner party and all the fancy people are there. And Wilson is seated next to this high-class socialite woman, and the woman says, Mr. President, my partner here next to me and I have a bet going, and I bet him that I can get more than 2 words out of you this whole evening. And his response was just, you lose, and then didn't say anything the rest of the evening. Now, that's probably too good to be true, but if any president could pull that one off, it would be Calvin Coolidge. And so some other quotes from Coolidge. He says at one point, perhaps one of the most important accomplishments of my administration has been minding my own business. It's not like a great poster gets made out of that, but that's his philosophy in a nutshell. Or I've never been hurt by something I didn't say. I don't get in trouble when I don't talk. Now, opening my mouth, that can get you in trouble in politics. The chief business of the American people is business. That's probably the most famous quote from Calvin Coolidge. The man who builds a factory builds a temple. Or don't expect to build up the weak by pulling down the strong. At greater length, he commented here on the American founding. And this is sort of a bit of a rebuke to progressivism, and progressivism that says, like, we need to add more, or we need more must be done, right? Like more reform, more fixes, more this, more that, or we need to rethink the American founding. Coolidge just says, no, we just need to protect the founding. Coolidge said, about the Declaration, there is a finality that is exceedingly restful. It's often asserted that the world has made a great deal of progress since 1776, and that we have new thoughts and new experiences which have given us great advance over the people of that day. And we may therefore very well discard their conclusions for something more modern, right, like Wilson's New Freedom. But that reasoning cannot be applied to this great charter, the Declaration. If all men are created equal, that's final. If they are endowed with inalienable rights, that is final. If governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, that is final. No advance, no progress can be made beyond these propositions. If anyone wishes to deny their truth or their soundness, the only direction which he can proceed historically is not forward, but backward, toward a time when there was no equality, no rights of the individual, no rule of the people. Those who wish to proceed in that direction cannot lay claim to progress. They are reactionary. Their ideas are not more modern, but more ancient than those of the Revolutionary Fathers. A final thought. How do you respond to Coolidge's approach? Do you think this could work today, an approach like this? Would the public ever go for this? Do you share his trust that society and private institutions can address most problems and fix most things better than government can? What do you think of that, students? There's a question for you to respond to. But that's it. That's Calvin Coolidge, the counterpoint to the modern American president.